we can start. Thank you, Rahul.
Sure. So, I've heard you say, you've shared this story before of a student asking the teacher how long it takes to reach enlightenment. And the punchline of the story is that the harder the student tries, the longer it takes. So, what's the right balance between kind of effort and non-effort, or desire and non-desire in spiritual practice?
Good question. Well, let me put it this way. I did say, somebody asked me, how long does it take to reach moksha? Look, the goal or that towards which we are moving or hoping to move is so different, in the sense the approach and the time is so different for different people that it's difficult to give a standard timeline for this, like a deadline. You can't say that everybody will. First of all, this is not a mass affair. I personally don't think people can attain whatever you want to call it, moksha, or in yogic terms, kaivalya, or in Buddhist terms, nirvana. Whichever word you use, it doesn't matter. But that, it differs. The time always is different for different people, and it can't be done en masse because each person is made differently. Of course, we have some common features, no question, but we have different backgrounds, different ways we are brought up. Even now, in this birth, forget about past births. If you go into that subject, well, definitely people are different because they had many past lives. You know that even in the life of the Buddha, there are so many past lives referred to. The only difference, as Krishna told Arjuna in the Gita, is that you have passed through many births. I have also passed through many births. The difference is that you don't know and I know. Therefore, it's very clear that you cannot give a timeline to people because it's quite individual. And the set of obstacles and the milestones that you encounter along the way may be different for different people. For some people the problem may be anger. For some people, the problem may be an inordinate sexual desire, for instance. There's nothing wrong with sexual desire. But there are people who are stuck with it. And in fact, for some people, it may be this obsession with any one thing. It need not be this. It could be anything. Now, to free yourself from that is a very individual effort. While we can have methods to free ourselves from that, we cannot say how fast and what timeline the methods will take to free ourselves from this to a considerable extent, so that you can look at what you want to look without prejudice. When I say prejudice, it's like an inbuilt screen which has been created, which effectively bars us from seeing the actuality out there. So, which is why we cannot give a timeline. Oh, well, if you have 10 students staying with us and learning, and if you watch each of them carefully and individually coordinate with them, it's possible to say that some persons are going to take less time or more time. But you cannot say that in such and such a time this is possible. It's also possible that someone suddenly discovers the fact that what you're seeking is not far away, and it's not a linear search from here to there, but you're looking for something which is here and now. Maybe if that flashes, then all timelines are shattered. But I cannot say this to somebody. And the additional reason being that they might imagine that they are progressing. Because I keep saying, oh, wonderful. So sometimes it's good to say, no, not wonderful at all. So that the person begins to think carefully, oh my God, I have to move.
So timelines, I understand that timelines aren't possible, but at the same time, is it possible to sort of prescribe a level of effort, right? Or is prescribing a level of effort also counter? Because I'll give you an example. I'm middle-aged officially, right? Maybe I have 30 to 50 more years of being alive. And if I said, Shriyam, what would be your prescription for the level of effort for me to finish in one lifetime? Is that a
It's hard to say. It's very hard to say. But I can say one thing. If you're really sincere about this, and you, so please note what I said. You can, whatever be the concept you have or whatever term you use for this freedom which we seek, or merger that you seek, whatever you want to call it. I'm saying that it depends on the sincerity. If you are really, really sincere, if that is the topmost priority in your life, then who knows, it could be tomorrow. And knowing you, I know that you have a great priority, and I also know that you have many of the things required to move forward in this path. I'm not trying to flatter you, but honestly, yes. But still, I can't say when. It would be wrong for me to say when, because it could be any time, or it could be after a few days, or months, or years. The only criteria is one pointedness towards the goal. Even though we can hardly define the goal, but the movement towards it, all the efforts towards it, if they're one pointed, I'm sure that speeds up the process. Yeah.
So there's this Zen saying, right? That says, practice like your hair's on fire. And on the other hand, I've heard and read stories of how every yogi kind of passes through one, if not many, crucifixions of
Yeah.
various sorts on the path of spiritual development. So, and it's not clear that a crucifixion is better than burning hair.
Yeah.
So, what's for someone who really has a little bit of clarity on what the forward path looks like, what's the incentive? What's the motivation to move forward?
When we begin the spiritual journey, the different people who begin for different reasons and think that this is a spiritual journey, but the genuine seeker begins the spiritual journey when he realizes, nobody said it more clearly than Buddha, that desire is the root of all sorrow. I mean, different traditions speak about it, people become monks and so on, but nobody said it so clearly as this. The first sermon in Sarnath, desire is the root of all sorrow. And he said, freedom from sorrow for all mankind is nirvana. Actually, all traditions have the same idea, but they approach it in different ways. However, to be free of this desire which causes sorrow, so the beginning is sorrow. The Bhagavad Gita, the first chapter is Arjuna Vishada Yoga, the sorrow of Arjuna. So when sorrow strikes, different people try to overcome it in different ways, or sweep it under the rug, or use entertainment. There are some who sit down and think, is there a permanent solution for this? Can I get out of this thing? That is the incentive.
A permanent solution.
A permanent solution to this pain and sorrow and suffering. This is the incentive. And anyone who really has caught on to this cannot not have an incentive towards this. Of course, there are distractions on the way, which are basically desires and various things, and obstacles to the practice, disturbances, conflicts. All these are there, but this is the main incentive. That what I achieve in small ways in this life, by, for instance, I want to have a nice ice cream and I have it and I'm happy for some time, but doesn't last. It goes. I'm not saying you should not have ice cream, but realize that it's a temporary solution and that you're looking. So this is the incentive. Now this burning of the hair has to look at one part in one particular stage of your spiritual, my understanding, okay, I'm not a great Zen teacher or anyone, but one particular stage of one's spiritual journey, one needs to put a lot of effort to keep away basically the distractions that very often, sometimes even confuse you intellectually by saying, oh, this is not the proper incentive. This is what is the, who knows that in the end there is a solution, and so on. All these are part of the distractions that occur. I know people who say, hey, go have a drink, man. What is this going to? These are also part of the distractions. Even though you have an incentive, you know somewhere deep down that we need to get out of this, yes, mess. Now, the Zen, since you mentioned Zen, they also have archery. Archery is one of the parts of Zen, at least some schools of Zen. Now the Zen teacher uses the archery as a great symbol to show where you need to apply complete force, like your head is on fire, your hair is on fire, and where you need to let go also. And for different sadhaks or different seekers, the proportion may differ. You can't, there is no one proportion like that, because their people are different. So the archery symbol is very interesting. You have the target there, you have your bow here, and you have the arrow. And the string of the bow has to be in its proper tension. If it is loose, it won't fire. If it's too tight, it's not advisable. It might miss even before you let go. So you take that bow and you put the arrow onto it. You pull the string taut, really taut, clean, as much as you can go probably. The archer knows how much to pull through practice, and so the training comes out there. And then the target and the head of the arrow and my eyes are in a straight line. And if I hold my breath and not shiver and falter, then I can probably hit the target, even the bullseye. But what do I have to do after all this preparation? I have to let go of the arrow from the string. Now, I cannot let go before preparation. It makes no sense to put the arrow there and it doesn't hit the target. So all this is the hair on fire. You know what I mean? This entire preparation, this whole exercise is one point at it. Then after that, if it has to hit the target, the arrow has to go, you have to let go some point. So the preparation is as important as the letting go. Look at a classical dancer. They practice for years to get the technique. Once they've mastered the technique, then they should innovate. If they don't innovate, then they're just imitations like anybody else. They know what the innovation is about. We may not be able to know, but when you see a really expert creative dancer, you know it. Something is happening which is not just the mechanical movements and the precision. Something is happening. But to say that I will not practice and I will not study the technique and innovate, what will you innovate on? There is nothing to innovate. So, I don't want to go on. You may have another question. Sorry.
So from that standpoint, is there innovation in spirituality as well? I mean, the West is so famous. We come up with all sorts of different yogas and all that. Does spirituality have that same thing where each teacher is bringing a little something new?
If it doesn't have, we should have it. Let me put it this way. So therefore, to say that this is the only approach, and I think we should also innovate. Why? Because we all live in different situations and different conditions in life. Take the seed which has been given to you, and then innovate on it. Like I may give you I or some other teacher may give you a perfect seed, could be. But the seed, the soil in which it is sown is different in different places, in different people. Now, innovation comes in how you look after this seed so that it sprouts, it gets enough sunshine, it gets enough water, this is innovation. And it may not be the same for everyone. You can't plant one particular seed in the desert. On the other hand, you might be able to plant a certain species of seed in the desert too, provided you know how to. Now, it is too much to expect the teacher to keep suggesting innovations. I would say what the teacher is primarily responsible is to inculcate, or rather to activate the intelligence in a person, because each person has a different way of looking at things, so that when they face a situation they will know how to innovate, rather than saying this is the technique. There is no technique in innovation. But to reach up to there, you need a technique. See, usually when a student comes to a teacher, he is like clay, no shape, no nothing. You see, he has he has a desire to go into a certain design. But like we have the Sufis, there is a particular order of Sufis called the Naqshbandis. Naqshbandi, it means the people of the design. So the student who presents himself to the teacher is clay, he has no design yet. Now the teacher has to mold the clay depending upon what kind of clay it is, how much water is required, what kind of, and what does this clay really want to become. Sometimes the idea of the design that the clay has may be not the actual design, but something which he has read or heard. So you have to first break that. I'm just saying. Then what happens? Then you get a mold into which it has to be fitted. You fit it into the mold. First it has to be kneaded enough that it goes into every corner of the mold. And then it has to be kept for some time till it gets into that shape. Now, if you want to see the image or the design that has developed by now, what does one have to do? You have to open both sides of the mold, demold it. If you don't take it out, it might have attained the best design possible, it will be still inside, nobody can see it. I would say that taking out of the mold is also some kind of innovation. It's a kind of breaking through. It's kind of freeing ourselves from the confines which made the design for us, so that you are now in open air. It's a little tricky, but it's needed. I was with my master Babaji. He taught me many things, but he left it to me many a time to work it out. Instead of sitting there, do this, do that, That's why sometimes I'm a little concerned about guided meditation. Sometimes. Because we say, oh, do this, now look at here. Look. I think, say, meditate and leave it there. Let them meditate, because they'll have their own meditation systems, designs. That's enough, good enough. But they're sitting together and doing it is important.
So my understanding is that there are two broad categories of kinds of meditation practice, right? Ones where you sort of, ones that expand the sense of self and ones that dissolve the sense of self. And the expansion sort of category are ones where deeper levels of concentration kind of open up inner mystical experiences. And the dissolution ones are ones where usually a lower level of concentration is used to just examine what's happening in the mind body system and eliminate the sense of a separate self. Are these two sort of divergent paths, or do they meet? Like, if you reach the end of one, have you achieved the other? What's the interrelationship between sort of expansion of self practices and dissolution of self practices?
Let me tell you that it's only with dissolution that the expansion can take place. What is being dissolved are the limitations. Anyhow, the mind doesn't have an idea of what the unlimited is. Because the mind is quite limited, at least as it functions today, depending on the inputs of the five senses, which the brain then works on the data and creates a blueprint. Yeah, this is how it functions. So therefore, the ordinary mind, which means the mind which is still caught up in looking at reality only through the mirror that is offered to us through the five senses or the instruments of perception, cannot conceive of an infinite something, whatever it is called, Shunya or Brahman or whatever you want, Purusha, yogic terms. So dissolution is as important as reaching out to the other. It's only when this is the limitations are dissolved. So some of the practices are meant for that, to break the ego and to dissolve it. So that what remains, I'm not saying the ego is completely gone, then there is no way to even recognize something. That only the subtle ego remains. You cannot even call it ego. If you in Vedantic terms, you will call it the Vijnanamaya Kosha, the sheath of Vijnana. But it is still there. When that is there, then only the mind begins to understand the infinitude of the infinite. So both are important. I think both finally take you to in the same direction. But the thing is, how judiciously we use these. Sometimes this has to be used, sometimes the other has to be used. And there is no hard and fast rule for this because people react to it in different ways. So the teacher here can figure out what is suitable for one person, which may not be suitable for the other. Definitely the cabbage has to be removed from the head, the basket of cabbage, before we can learn to swim. But a teacher has to figure out how the cabbage is taken away from them. Because sometimes the student may not even be aware that he is carrying the basket of cabbage, and much of it is already rotten.
Mm.
This is important. And sometimes, I have noticed this in this process, that some people get very upset and angry with the teacher because they want to swim with the cabbage on their heads, which is impossible. It takes a lot of convincing to say, man, this is not my concern, it's your concern, get it down.
So what do you make then of the traditional story of the Buddha's enlightenment, right? Like, he went through this process where he practiced all of the existing yogic things and he achieved kind of the highest levels of samadhi that teachers could offer. And then he had to he actually came back, right? And he was using a lower level of concentration in the Vipassana technique, which is the one technique he's taught, right? Was it just a particular of his mode of liberation? Because now Buddhists understand it to be the way, right?
Yes, this is the problem. Look, I'm not saying, well, Buddha did have an universal teaching. There's no question about that in my mind. But for that teaching to take effect, in fact, I would say that Buddhism, the inner aspects of Buddhism, are more suitable for people who, as the Buddhists say, as Buddha said, have set forth. Buddham Sharanam Gacchami. Now, Gaccha means walk, set forth. Sangam Sharanam Gacchami. I'm walking forth into the Sangha. That means you're walking out of something into something else. You're stepping out. In fact, if you translate it in English, it would be setting forth. So therefore, for those who set forth, for family people, for married people, for day-to-day business and so on, truly speaking, the essence of Buddhism may not apply, may not be effective, because it's meant basically for, it's a religion of total renunciation. You see the Buddhist monks, the Sangha, they gave up everything and went and set forth. That is Buddha's way. It is also the way with the Jains, which is more extreme than the Buddhist. You must understand, you know it of course, that the Buddha spent a long time with the Shravanas. And the Shravanas are these Digambara Jain monks who did not believe that you can free the ego if you cannot take off your clothes. Now, Buddha modified this and made it into a middle path. He said these extremes are not going to help, but he passed through the extremes. You should remember that. He himself passed through all the extremes. You said the simple method of meditation called Vipassana. You can't say it is simple because the technique is simple. It's a depth. It's a technique with great depth, actually. You can't say that it's simple in the sense that, yeah, you can say it doesn't have too many paraphernalia. Yes, I understand. But it's a very deep method. And while Buddha had finished, you know the story that he was starving, and you know how the Buddhists, the Jains attain nirvana by giving up food, by giving up water. They think the body has to disintegrate and then nirvana occurs. Some stand still till they die. Now there are 2 points here. Buddha said there is no point in attaining nirvana after you die, standing there with all these austerities. You don't know what happens after that. That's a very practical way of looking at it. And 2, this kind of extreme what can you call it? Penance, extreme disregard for the human body and the mind, which are interrelated, are not going to take us to a state where there is peace and well-being. So you know the story. He was fasting for many days, hoping to attain nirvana. And then a lady offered him some food. He ate the food. As soon as he ate the food, the Shravanas discarded him, saying this fellow has broken his rules, he's out. It was after eating that food and sitting under the peepal tree when the body and the mind were at rest and not suffering from hunger and misery that the Buddha attained nirvana. That's what the story says. We don't know, but this is what it says. So Buddha was trying to touch the middle path. However, the inner teachings of the Buddhist philosophy are easier practiced by those who go forth than those who still sit in. It's not so easy to do that.
So when you say those who sit here, you mean people who are just ordinary householders with responsibilities?
It's not so easy to, for instance, take this basic principle of the Buddhist teaching of Buddha's sermon saying desire is the root of all sorrow. It's not so easy. You can understand it, of course, but to practice it is not so easy. That's what I'm trying to say. And therefore, I would say that any Buddhist who's seriously trying to follow the Buddhist teachings should, after finishing his duties, at least set forth and be a monk and be at peace with himself. That's the path, that's the Buddhist path. It may not be the same with the yogic path, but if you go close to the Vedantic, Adi Shankara, who taught the Vedantic path, also believed in a way that sannyas is required to touch the truth. Buddha was before him. Now there are two theories. Some people say that Shankara said that to compete with the Buddhist theory. But I don't think he had any competition like that. I think he realized the importance of it. The only thing is, in ancient India, of course, Buddha rebelled, but in ancient India, the sadhak or the ordinary human being like you and me also went through 4 stages in life. The first stage is brahmacharya. Now in brahmacharya, in any case, there is no distraction because true brahmacharis have no distraction because they are using all their energies on studies and understanding and practicing and pranayam and asana and on their ceremonies or whatever they are doing, so that there is no time left for anything else and there is no illegal sex involved anyway. When I say illegal, I am talking from the worldly point of view. So that period of brahmacharya ends only when you enter the family life. Now in family life, you go through all this. You have desires. It's not as if desire has brought about family life. The family life brings about desires, how to live, how to earn your living. Now, quite normal. It's legitimate. And then when the children have grown up and they have settled, then you enter the period called vanaprastha, where children may be there, you may be in the house, but you spend long times in solitude trying to figure out how to move forward. But you have performed all your duties. And in that vanaprastha stage, you can remain if you want till the end. But some people then see a glimmer of light and say, I think I must cut myself off and take sannyas. That is the last stage. So there are 2 kinds of sannyas. Those who take sannyas to make their journey easier, and those who take sannyas because they have seen the light. There is nothing else to do. 2 kinds of sannyas. It's traditionally accepted that there are 2 kinds of sannyas. Now what Shankara did was jump from brahmacharya into sannyas. I am saying in the particular circumstances in which we live, it is very dangerous and difficult to do that. So therefore, it's better to pass through these stages. For most people, we are not all Buddhas. And Buddha did the same. Shankara jumped from brahmacharya to sannyas. Buddha jumped from the next stage, which is grahastha to sannyas. I would say that Buddha had a little more experience of the world because he remained married for some time. And he was a king. I was a prince. And so he had exposed himself to all that wealth can bring and all that money, all that desire can bring, and then gave it up. Maybe a more much, but on the other hand, there is this that he walked off at midnight without even telling his wife. On one hand, it would be looked at as a great crime that you have walked off. But when you consider that a man left what was small to find what is bigger and giving it to the whole world. And this is kind of cancelled. And the compassion of the Buddha was such that he said the Bodhisattva principle, of course, there is no Bodhisattva principle in the Sutrayana Buddhism, but it is there in the Mahayana text, is that till I get this freedom, this nirvana to even one living being, until as many people as I can be led into nirvana, I don't want to end my life. I don't mind coming back again and again. This is the Bodhisattva concept. So I think in Buddha's case, that was what he was trying to do. What we have to consider is that in our stage of evolution, in the way of life that we have now, which is different from the times of Buddha or the times of Shankaracharya, we need to adapt and adjust to this system and yet not lose sight of the goal. So, yeah.
Another question about the Buddhist system, right? The Buddhists have these very elaborate maps of various stages of insight and absorption. And I'm curious about whether the yogic literature has any sort of similar kind of mapping, and also how that Buddhist mapping maps onto the sort of chakra system.
So which Buddhist theory, system are you talking about? Because
the Sutrayanas, the Theravadas, right? They have all of these 8 jhanas, the stages of 8 jhanas, and leading up to the first dip of these various kinds of stages that occur, some of which are very horrible, etc., right?
Right.
And they kind of have a very sophisticated map, like here's what happens, and here's what the condition is to sort of go on to the next step, so on and so forth.
Unfortunately, you don't have such an elaborate study of this in the, Vedanta has to some extent, but the best you can find probably is in the Yoga and Sankhya philosophy. If you study the Yoga Sutras, word by word, you will find that different states of mind and different stages that you go in are being described. But they are not described in such illustrious or such detailed terms as they have been done in the Buddhist literature. They have not. But there are descriptions. It's not that there are. And there's a general categories have been put up and how one goes through different stages. Now, there is also in the yogic science, if you go through the yoga tantras, like the Sat Chakra Nirupana and so on, there is this different stages of one's consciousness in this journey, or different stations, have been linked to the different centers called the chakras or the padmas. Now, the Buddhist teachings of the Tibetans, which is derived first from Padmasambhava and then from the various teachers of the Kagyu order who came from, most of them were from Kashmir and Bengal and so on. Of course, the culmination was Milarepa, who was a Tibetan himself. The Kagyu order teachings and the yellow hat original teachings of Padmasambhava, from which the Dzogchen also derives, they have adopted this chakra system, and for some reason the Buddhist mind, whether it is Indian or Tibetan, goes into elaborate descriptions. Even here, we have in the Satchakra Nirupana description of the Padmas, but when you go to the Buddhist literature and look at the chakras described in, for instance, words of my perfect master, Patrul Rinpoche's, you will find the details are very elaborate, like the mandalas. We have yantras in Tantra, But the yantras are not so elaborate as the mandalas. So I think the minds of the early Buddhists were into detail. In a way, they are good because the modern mind also likes details. I always come across this thing. You tell them that you breathe through the Ida and exhale to the Pingala, and you breathe to the Pingala and exhale through the, you know, some people come up with questions like, so how short should it be? How long should it be? Can we do it while we are sleeping? In fact, somebody said, can I do Anulom Vilom in my potty when I am in? Details are there, of course, but you don't have to go into all the details. So, you know what I mean. So, for some minds, the Buddhist way of approaching an elaboration may be very useful, especially artistic people who are, painters, artists. They love this detail of a mandala and the colors of the mandala. The main idea is finally to achieve nirvana, but to distract the mind from the ordinary life's enjoyments through getting it to be involved in enjoyments of a different nature, which is all this, the elaborate ceremonials, the elaborate mandalas, elaborate meditations, and so on, for a time takes the mind out from there. And then you come to the Mahamudra teachings where everything is dissolved. There is no meditator, there is no meditating, there is nothing. There is Mahamudra is emptiness, Shunya. But you suddenly cannot go from being engaged in the activities of this world into Mahamudra. It's impossible. So these help to make the mind more and more refined, more and more one-pointed. And at the same time allows the mind to delight in something which is not of the senses. Not of the outside world, internally. And then finally break the mold. So I think that may be the reason why they are so elaborate. I have studied a little bit of it from the Kagyu order. I have taken some empowerment from the Kagyus. And it's so elaborate that when you sit down, for instance, in Tantra, in Yoga Tantra, or in the practice of Tantra Yoga, if you sit down, you're asked to protect yourself. Even in the Indian Tantras, you are asked to protect yourself. So you draw a circle and you sit inside and you chant something which has the bijaksharas of fat, fat and so on to keep all distractions and everything away, and then you start your practice. Okay. Now if you go into the Kagyu order of how they protect themselves, it's very interesting. It's so elaborate. Every little pore from where your hair grows, you visualize little dakinis, ferocious looking dakinis with spears standing there. When you breathe in, they're all on the pores. When you breathe out, they're all spreading out in all directions, ready to poke anybody that comes. You see how it has been elaborated. That's what I'm trying to say. Now, the emptiness that we need to visualize to get out of the to dissolve from the distractions that we have has been described in one way in Yoga Tantras. Now in the Tibetan Yoga Tantras, you actually have to visualize your body as empty. Detail. There is no intestine, there is no brain, there is only the form. And the form then goes into the void. And some other form replaces it. It's elaborate. Why they became so elaborate, I can't say, but apparently I have a feeling that it appeals to a certain kind of mind. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It appeals to a certain kind of mind. But with the remembrance that ultimately Mahamudra and Nirvana, breakthrough.
Yeah. I've heard about stories of certain advanced practitioners, particularly in Zen and Theravada, whose experience of ordinary reality becomes a sort of a high frequency thing, right? They experience reality arising and passing thousands of times in a second, right? I'm curious, what like does the advancement of the practice through any tradition necessarily pass through that kind of an experience of ordinary reality, or how does the perception of ordinary reality change after you've achieved the goal?
You have to presume that you have touched the goal before, which is I'm very reluctant to start on that premise. But see, in the beginning, one need to come out of the distractions of the sensory world to find that which is permanent. But once you have touched that, suppose, then there is no need to escape or to come out of any distractions, because everything becomes part of one. Don't know how to put it. Where there is no inside or there is no outside. The inner and the outer are the same. There is no distinction between the two. But this has to be first found inside before you can see it outside. Which is why all the sadhana and all the, but when you've done it, then you see like every movement of every electron and atom in the space is part of oneself. It's like our own movement. There is no difference really. So this division of the inner and the outer ceases to exist when you have touched the depths of understanding. So even while you're eating, you're drinking, you're having your tea, you're working, there is no difference. You don't have to actually sit down somewhere and meditate. I'm very reluctant to say this because then everybody says I've attained that nirvana. I don't have to meditate. It's a dangerous thing to say. Somebody told me the other day, I don't need all this. Why? Because, I am free. I said, okay, let's say that I accept that you're free. Are you free of not going to the bar at 7:30 in the evening? No. Why? Because then the mind expands. So which means it is not expanded now. You're not able to dull your central nervous system without the help of that spirit that comes in the bottle. So how free are you really? I'm not objecting to this guy going to the bar once in a while. I'm not saying that. I'm saying the way you think about it. So you're right, at that stage, in fact, many yogic texts have also described this, that when you touch that, like the Zen teacher says, the water is flowing under the bridge. We don't know if the water is flowing or the bridge is flowing, because both are the same. It can happen only when all conditionings have been completely shattered, broken. Then there is no soul and there is no body. That distinction is removed. There is only that energy and the consciousness, which is conscious energy. Let's not say it is separate from the energy. Well, that's all I can say. I don't know what to say.
Sure. I want to switch to questions that other people have sent me, if that's okay.
How much time?
How much time?
Rahul, we have only 5 more minutes to go. So it's okay with me. It's okay if you have a question, yes.
Yeah, so let me ask the question from Sadhana Mehta. She says, Ashwin, let me try and change the lighting here because the sunrise has happened. Is this okay?
I'm
Can you
fine.
see me okay? Okay. So she says the goal of spiritual training is to make you independent and stand on your own 2 feet. Yet you also need proximity and attunement to a qualified teacher. At what point is attachment or latching on to a guru a hindrance in spiritual practice?
I would say that when you start itself, be aware of this danger. Don't wait for it to happen. Uh, be aware of this danger even when you start saying. It's more important to understand what this guy is saying than get attached to this person. What happens is the dependence is basically because one gets attached to the image and to the personality rather than what's coming out of it. So when you start your relationship with the teacher, if you keep this in mind, unless the teacher deliberately wants you to be attached to his form and shape, and so then I can't say anything about it. I'm not, from my side. If somebody insists, because if I lose my disciples, what will happen to my income? Yeah. So if that fear is not there, because nowadays you have to pay large sums of money to do many things. So if I say, oh, I'm not important, you can learn somewhere else, what happens to me? But I think a spiritual teacher shouldn't have such a thought, really. So I think from the beginning you should understand that this man is trying to inculcate something in you, teach you something. The teachings are more important than the person, so that you don't get caught to the person but are more involved with the teachings. If in the beginning if you start that, then there is less danger of being caught. Babaji used that deliberately when he used to throw me out for long periods of time. Get out. Why? Because you too caught up with me. Get out. So I have learnt it that way. And believe me, it may sound blasphemous, but I have learned many good things in the period when he had thrown me out. More than perhaps when I was with him. Something very important to note.
So Jyoti Shekhar has a question. She says, what's the best way to get rid of deep-rooted self-destructive habits that come in the way of spiritual discipline?
There's no way. First you need to recognize them. Don't sweep them under the rug. See them as they are. You see them and then start 1, 2, 3, 4, eliminating one by one. You cannot do it at once. Only when you reach nirvana that everything happens at once. But till then one has to painfully eliminate. But to eliminate you have to first be aware that they exist. So one of the things is she's very emotional. She has to figure this out. It's okay. You can be emotional, but at some point one has to go beyond it. So one needs to work on it.
We have 2 questions from Vishva B and 1 question from Darshan. Should we continue or?
Yes. Let's have another 5 minutes. Yes, no problem.
Okay. So Vishwa B is asking, on very rare occasions when your guru suggests you do something, but sounds a bit skeptical, and you do something, but you are a bit skeptical, and the core of your being strongly suggests that you do the opposite. What should you choose, and more importantly, how should you believe in and proceed with your choice if you go against your guru's recommendation?
I think if he's a real teacher, real guru, he would have studied you well. My teacher knew about me better than I knew. So if that's the kind of teacher, when it's a good thing to follow and see his instructions rather than go against it. But you may go against it experimentally to see where you go. There's no harm. You can try. But if you come to realize maybe it's better to follow or to do what he's, I think then you shift to it. But some people are very independent minded. I suggest to them, go against it. Figure out for some time. Then you will come back. When you come back, I say, okay, now I told you, carry on. The teacher shouldn't get upset that this fellow is not listening to what I said. The teacher is not sitting here to get upset. He's sitting here to guide. So some natures are like that. They like to react. It starts from home actually. Some children, I found it when I was very young very hard to accept things. When I came back from school and when I had to change my shorts and wear something new, if my mother kept saying change your shorts, I would not do it. Then she found out the secret. As soon as I come in, she would say, don't change your shorts. I'd immediately go and change it. So this might be one of the techniques adopted by the teacher, like the Zen masters do. So Vishwa,
He's also asking, is it possible for someone to never find the one guru for them, but instead that different gurus come at different times and play the role they needed to that person, and they still find and manifest their...
Absolutely fine. Absolutely fine. See, in fact, this is one of the key principles of the Sufi system. In fact, when a teacher finds that the student has studied whatever he can study and absorb from this particular teacher, then the teacher himself advises, now this is all I can do for you. Maybe I can do more for somebody else. This is all I can do for you. Go find someone else, and he might even give you a pointer to go there. Go there. So he goes there and he studies for some time, and then the teacher says, now go. Unfortunately today, there is not much choice to send people. This is the whole problem. One gets worried. We don't want people to get lost sometimes. But no harm. One is doing it deliberately oneself, not on the instructions of the teacher, but I want to change. It's absolutely great. There is no harm. There should be no such bond. Should be free.
This is the last question, from Darshan Purandare, who says, in today's world, while we are pursuing the ultimate and doing the sadhana, we're also very busy in work and other aspects of life. How does this compare to the Guru Shishya Parampara of old times, when the sole focus of the seeker was to seek the truth? How can a modern day seeker who rarely gets to see his guru daily stay motivated and plugged in at all times?
Motivation is something that has to come from oneself. It does not depend on whether you have to have a guru with you all the time. And traditionally, when they stayed in pathshalas and ashrams and gurukulas, this was possible. The system has collapsed now. This is not possible. So, all you can do is get the best possible and carry on with how you can grow with your spiritual life, and where possible, interact with the teacher. That's the only possibility. There's no other way. Yes, there is an advantage. The advantage is today science has brought technology to us. Now look, you and I haven't met, but we are sitting face to face. This is possible. So that is the plus point. In those days in Gurukulas, you didn't have a TV screen and you didn't have internet. So you had to be there. Today you can Zoom. So there is a possibility. So what I'm saying is, try to use modern science to bring about a change in our lives and not get caught up with it and become a slave to technology. So today's Pathashala or Gurukula is the internet. Google is G, God is G, Gurukula is G.
Well, thank you for making yourself
Thank you,
available over.
Thank you. Meet again.
especially for going extra time. I know that.
And it's a pleasure talking to you. That's why. Thank you.
All right. Thank
Namaskar.
you. Namaskar.